Good evening, students. Welcome to Political Violence of POL 2260. Today's topic is political violence, and what a right time to talk about this, especially with the things which are going in our country. And let's define political violence before we get on with the different forms of political violence. Okay, and how to counter that in giving examples of each of this and the types of regimes and type of violence which they could face. All these discussions we have today. Okay, let's talk about political violence to define. What do you think is a political violence? Can you define a violence? You all know violence, right? What say if you are going in a dark alley? Let's make this situation, and you have a nice laptop. I wear a ski mask and come and rob yours and go away. Would you think that's a political violence? There's violence. Say I use the knife as well. God forbid, cut it a little bit. Blood. You have to have violence. You think? No, there's no political motive. So there has to be a political motive. The other one is just monetary, self-monetary motive. Whereas political motives would be there in order to be called the political violence. And what would be a good example? Terrorism. That's a good one. And there are different types of terrorism. We'll talk about it. One is domestic terrorism, which means terrorism which is grown inside the country's sovereignty, within the state boundaries, and acts to achieve a political goal. Another one, second type of terrorism, is transnational terrorism. It's a terrorism which is coming from outside the country, internationally. So if I have to give an example in the United States, transnational terrorism, 9/11, where the terrorists, most of them came from Saudi Arabia. They were on international student visas. And so those you would call transnational terrorism attacks in the US soil. There was in the 1990s a guy named Timothy McVeigh, a white supremacist, who bombed the federal building in Oklahoma. And he is a domestic terrorist, American, Christian, white. And he had political goals. It's not like because he was crazy and blew up a building and killed so many people, but political motive was in it. So apart from terrorism, what else could be considered as a political violence? Yes, riots. Riots could be, right? For political reasons, if Trump supporters do a riot going into the building of Congress, that is a political violence, right? Civil war inside a country between two groups. The United States fought a civil war, right? 1861 to 65. Two sides fought in the battlefield and so many died. Huge percentage of Americans died in the war than any other war before or after. And that is a political violence. What else would be considered political violence? What about insurgency? Insurgency, right? There's an occupation and there's a group of guerrillas fighting insurgent movements. That's political violence. But we're not talking about war in essential in this class. I teach a whole class on war, peace and war. But we're not going to talk about war because it's an international relations aspect. War, civil war is a domestic inside the sovereign state. Then you would call that, you could compare why some countries have civil war and others don't. Whereas international war between two countries will be different. What about crime? It won't be. There's no political motive, right? Monetary motive is not. has to be political. This is a political class and political violence, it says. What about coup d'etat? We talked about it last class, right? Coup d'etat. To do a coup against the power, to overthrow the power. What's the difference between that and revolution? That's also political violence. A revolution, it's people getting involved, large number of public involved in support of overthrowing the power. Whereas in coup d'etat, just the elites. It could be military elites, it could be very rich people who wants to overthrow the government. It's just few small group of people overthrowing the government. Are you following what I'm saying? Okay. So now let's talk about the different why political violence happen. Why political violence? There are three things. One is, yes, ideational. That means based on ideas. Okay. Another one is, yes, can you guess? Is institutional. Institutional. Institutional means based on institutions. We're going to talk about this. And third one, individual, psychological. Individual, psychological. Let's talk about the institutional one. Institutions, you know what an institution is, right? Baruch College is an institution, educational institution. A political institution, we talked about like Supreme Court of the United States or the federal government have multiple institutions, right? Institutional restrictions could create the way the society is set up, the institutions are set up, could fumigate to instigate a violence. I'll give you an example. Have you heard of Arab Spring? Arab Spring? Yes. It happened in the Middle East. It spread from one country to another, right? When it started in a country, there was a man named Mohammed Azizi. And Mohammed Azizi is a fruit vendor. He makes a little living selling those fruits in the fruit cart on the street. This is a third world country, poor country. And the leader is in power and not doing anything for the people, only for the benefit of the people in power and his people entourage of family members and others. So this person, when he was selling the fruit, that particular day a cop came up to him and asked for bribery money. This is common. It happens. I've seen it with my own eyes in India and other third world countries. Bribery, they take every day, regular money to sell. And this guy said, I haven't sold any yet, so please wait so that I could sell and then give. The policeman was angry, so he completely kicked his fruit stand. And the vendor was so angry that he poured gasoline on him in front of the political institution and burned himself. A revolution broke out and it spread from one country to another. And it shook many, many governments. It also went all the way to Syria, in which the civil war still goes on. Are you following? Yes, people protested against their government because of institutions which are entrenched in power for a long time and don't care about the people, but for their benefit they stay in power and oppress the people. This Arab Spring created overthrow of government in some places, right? Tunisia and Egypt also. Tahrir Square, people came and protested. Hosni Mubarak has to resign, right? Obama was president. He put pressure asking Hosni Mubarak to resign. And so many other countries, it didn't topple the governments. Okay? So now the question is how institutions create this problem. So institutions where the people feel like they have power or say in it is not going to create revolutions. But if they feel they are oppressed from the top, that is a powder keg for revolution or political violence in large scale to say. Now, ideational. Let's talk about ideational. which is basically idea, based on ideas. What examples comes to your mind? Anything? It's correct. International terrorist groups like ISIS. ISIS. You know what ISIS full form is? IS, right? What does that mean, full form? Islamic State in Iraq and Syria. Yeah. They call themselves a state. You hear that? You know the definition of state. Now, state, regime, government, you learned it in the second class. State. No terrorist movement created a state, independent state. They were conquering landmass bigger than England in Iraq and Syria. All these lands, by the way, Iraq and Syria are where countries formed out of the Ottoman Empire when it fell, when Ottoman Empire was defeated during World War One. It was carved out by the British and the French. That's another story. One of my favorite professors from graduate school wrote a book called A Peace to End All. His name is David Fromkin. David Fromkin is Fromkin. Okay, A Peace to End All Peace. Check out this book if you're interested. It's a very good book to understand Middle East. Okay, origin of the modern Middle East. Now, ISIS started, and many people went to join them from other countries throughout the world. They're traveling to Middle East, tearing their passports and joining it. Why would they do that? Idea. The idea is so powerful. They were very good with propaganda. ISIS propaganda. I'll talk about it a little bit. The recruitment tactics include that there is a caliphate. Caliphate is the leader, political and military leader. Okay, at that time, the second powerful ISIS leader who was killed during Trump administration was al-Baghdadi. A-L, Baghdad. You know how to spell the Baghdad city in Iraq, capital. Put an I at the end. Baghdadi, al-Baghdadi, and he had a PhD in Islamic scholarship. Okay, and he could quote Quran left and right. So he had the credibility. And he claimed he's from the Quraysh community. What do you mean Quraysh? Quraysh community is where the community in Saudi Arabia, in Mecca, where Prophet Muhammad came from in 6th century. Are you following? So he claimed, I come from that, my background, and I have this Islamic knowledge. And so, if you believe in a caliphate, wherever you live, you will give up your place of residence and move to live under the caliphate's rule. So the many men who believed in it went. And some women too, young women, when they went, they were kept as prizes for this men who is coming from other places. They were forced to marry those men coming from other places. Some of them were teenagers, sadly, who marrying to much older men, forced to marry. And ISIS did not just, like Al-Qaeda, unlike Al-Qaeda, did not do just an attack and went in hiding. They want to conquer a state, run a state. Of course, they don't believe in sending ambassadors to UN, like other states send, or 93 countries, because they believe that they're only accountable to God and not to these human forms of international organizations like the United Nations. So, but they did give services to the people living under their territory. So when they occupy territories, those people have to be converted to their version of Islam. Otherwise, you will be killed or could be used as sex slaves, women. So they gave money like a communist government and you could live. And you might think, where did they get their money from? They got money from oil, selling oil in black market. And also the banks they capture in Iraq and other places, Syria. When they occupy a territory and they catch the bank, they'll take money. They also did kidnappings, hostage situation, money. ransoms, but mostly from oil, selling it in black market. They made up one time about $1 million a day they were making. So that's some money revenue. They're not taxing their people. You understand how system of government state works. Taxing people, they're not doing it based on consent. And now, where do they get their weapons, you might think? Many of the weapons were weapons given by the United States to Iraqi forces after Iraq was defeated, Saddam Hussein was defeated, and America was babysitting the country, state building, as they call nation building. And we had weapons which we gave to Iraqi forces, training them to manage their own country affairs so we could get out. And those weapons in the arsenals were taken over by ISIS, and many of the weapons, American weapons, were in the ISIS hands. So they ran the government, and people went and joined them. Are you following me? And that is ideational. When I say ideational, it's based on the idea the caliphate is legitimate. Go back to legitimacy. Remember, we talked about charismatic legitimacy? Remember, traditional legitimacy? Hello? Yeah. He's using both. Traditional, he's talking a Quraysh community. So he's saying like, oh, I come from Prophet Muhammad's time. If you're a Muslim, Prophet Muhammad is your prophet. And he's coming from that community. And he knows Quran left and right. Well, he has a PhD in it. And he could quote. And most of these men are uneducated. They can't even read their own Quran and understand what it says there. So these guys could warp, propaganda could warp, change things to the way they want them to understand. Are you following? In fact, they will doctrinate even photographs. So if you are a soldier who go and join this ISIS, and the ISIS in battlefield, if you die, you're dying in a cause for God. So you will go to heaven. That's a propaganda. And there will be 72 virgins waiting for you. So many of these men who are died in the battlefield, their photographs will be altered to look like they're smiling. They're happy to go to heaven. Recruitment, basically, for their violence. What do they want? What is their political goal? They're doing violence. What is their political goal? Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, their goal, you want to know? To defeat the West, overall West. Where? In a place called Dabiq. They even had a magazine, like Scientific American kind of monthly magazine, that they even had a Twitter account for a long time. And in Dabiq, the place, Dabiq, they will defeat the West. They said we will break your crosses, we will defeat your men, we will enslave your women. Fanatic. All the terrorist groups are fanatical. Otherwise, how could you involve in this kind of political violence? Are you following? Okay. Now we talked about institution, talked about ideas. So I gave you an example of ISIS. You will be watching a documentary on the rise and fall of ISIS. A fantastic documentary and writing about for this class. But apart from it, I'm using that as an example for ideational, using ideas for political violence. The third one is psychological or individual violence. What is that? Psychological or individual. This is an individual who is not working for ISIS or anything, but and mental illness. He has a political goal, and then he might go on Google, say ISIS or even Al Qaeda or any of terrorist groups banned by the United States government, and wanted to learn about that and say, oh, I believe in their cause. America is doing bad. So some guy could go and do bad things outside, terrorist activities. Are you following? So these are the three types, explanations for political violence. Good. Now we're going to talk about forms. We're going to compare different types of political violence. We already learned about terrorism a bit, but there's more other types of violence. Check this out. Draw this table clearly. On the top is actor. Okay, it's like a 4 quadrants. Draw it. State, non-state. You know what a state is. Non-state is anyone, individuals who doesn't have the state authority. Remember again, the lecture, state has the monopoly in using force. Non-state actor doesn't have monopoly, doesn't even have the right to use force. So non-state actors are terrorists or non-state actors. Individuals like you and me are non-state actors. We live here. Okay, but we do have an influence using civil societies, global civil societies like Human Rights Watch or Red Cross. Okay, you could do influence international affairs or even domestic affairs. Okay, non-state. Here, what's that? State. Here, civilians. Okay, the non-state civilians is similar language. Target. Okay, who is getting targeted? Now I'm going to ask you one by one. If a state actor targets another state targets another state, what is that called? That political violence is called. It's called war. The standard one. War between countries. We're not going to talk about that. There's a whole class you could take on war. Like I said, I teach peace and war and ethics of the use of force, all these courses. But we're not going to talk about war here. Okay? And then let me go here. Non-state actor. It's not a state actor, non-state actor attacking a state. What will that be? Guerrilla war. Guerrilla, not this gorilla, King Kong. Guerrilla, it's Spanish word. Urban warriors created during the when French occupied the Spaniards. Okay, guerrilla is Guerilla. War. Guerrilla war. This is war waged inside a state by hit and attack and run away. Because they cannot fight a state which has mighty weapons and manpower. You can't fight it directly. You can hit and run. I'll give you an example. Guerrilla warfare is what Washington did. George Washington fought against the British because the British was a mighty military at the time. They put 30,000 troops in New York Harbor. 30,000. New York City entire population is not 30,000. The largest population was Pennsylvania. It didn't even have 30,000 people. Imagine now the New York City population, 8.5 million. I put 10 million troops in New York Harbor. Will you dare to fight that? I wouldn't. But the Americans fought. How did they fight? They can't fight directly because they will pummel you with their mighty military. So hit and run. If you have seen Hamilton the musical, you even see a song written on that. Hit and run. Yeah? And this is not like this is a new strategy they created. This was even used by the Romans, the strong military power, against the brilliant military strategist and military commander, Carthage General Hannibal. His name is Hannibal Barca. He came against Rome. Okay, there's many good books if you want to read. It's beautiful. Why would I read ancient military warfare? Well, you would understand so much, and it still use his tactics in the battlefield are studied during even Desert Storm operation by America. Okay, it's Cannae. The battle is called Battle of Cannae. So if you want to read the Ghosts of Cannae, check out the book. It's fascinating. Read it. Your mind will expand in different forms. So now coming back to guerrilla warfare, George Washington did that and was able to hit and run. Unexpected time. Have you ever seen the poster of George Washington in the Delaware River crossing, standing up in the boat? He didn't technically stand up there with the snow. He will fall, but it's beautiful for painting. It's fictional. Of the reality happened. Brave enterprise. He did cross and go and attack them in the nighttime before sun was coming up at the time. Then Christmas Eve they crossed and attacked the British unexpected. So it's not like conventional war. Both sides are coming and fighting straight up, attack them. It's a guerrilla warfare. The famous painting is, right. And what would the state do against guerrilla warfare? Okay, these are like insurgents, guerrilla warfare. So against insurgency, you know how to spell insurgency? INSURGENCY. Against insurgency, you do counterinsurgency. So in fact, the Marines have a manual. You can read it. It's called COIN. COIN, counterinsurgency. CO, counterinsurgency. COIN manual. If you Google, you'll find it. COIN manual. There's a famous PhD thesis dissertation on it. It's called Eating Soup with a Knife. Eating Soup with a Knife. Isn't that cool title? It's hard. You separate the guerrilla warriors from the people who give them support, because the food, the moral support, the clothing, everything comes from the people to the guerrilla warriors. Washington was getting all the support of his people. In order to remove them, the people will be put in like a concentration camp type of setting. The French did that, counterinsurgency, COIN, in Algeria against FLN. Okay. Of course, they also did a lot of torture, the French, and lost the war, because that creates repercussions when you do torture of a lot of civilians, innocent civilians. But you following counterinsurgency is called COIN. It's against guerrilla warfare. Now you understand that. I gave you so many examples. The British successfully have done counterinsurgency operations in Malaya, and that's why actually the book is The Eating Soup with a Knife. It's based on it. Now, non-state actors attacking civilians. What will that be? Non-state actors attacking civilians. You got it right. Terrorism. Of course, I already explained to you different types of terrorism. State, I explained about transnational terrorism, domestic terrorism, right? Now, what is terrorism? How would you define terrorism? This is one of my favorite things to define, because there's no universal definition of terrorism. Even if you look into American government definitions of FBI, CIA, Defense Department, they have variations. Scholars worked on it for 3-4 years, political scientists, and couldn't come up with a universal definition that everybody could accept. Unlike in physics, gravitation or electrostatic forces, there's a universal definitions. You can't. It's very elusive, political science, or any social science for that matter. So they came up with important points, aspects that should be there to be considered a terrorism. And I'm going to tell you those 4 using an acronym which you will not forget. Trust me. You're like, really? Yes. Visa, like a passport visa. Visa. V, write it down, for violence. If I ask you to define terrorism, I want this to be defined like this. V for violence or threat of violence. I for innocent targets. Civilians are innocents. They're non-combatants. Innocent means not like baby angel, but non-combatants. Like in a war, there's people fighting, but they both are wearing uniform. That's fair game. One guy can shoot another guy, and the other guy can shoot back, because they are sworn to their state to protect and fight in war, to kill and be killed. In the same moral field. Here, terrorism, innocent targets, the civilians. So if this mob, which went into the Capitol, took up the senators and the speaker, say, or even the vice president, or the House of Representatives, any of them, senators, they are not combatants. These guys could have killed them or harmed them. That is terrorism. That is why it is. But media gets this too correct. You have to have all 4 to be called the terrorism. All 4. Keep that in mind. Next time media jumps in to call something a terrorism, you have to know. Pull up this visa and see whether violence is there. Threat of violence. Okay? And I Okay, 5 people died here, by the way, including a cop. They killed them, right, in the Capitol Hill march. That's why there's a domestic terrorism. Innocent lives staged. Are they staging it? So remember the first example I gave. If you have a fine laptop and I put a ski mask to come and steal it from you, I will steal it and go, and I will hope that you don't complain to the police. Why? Because in that way, I could keep doing it, one, and I won't get caught, punished for my crime. But staged means I want that news to be all over the paper. So if you don't go tell media, it's great for me. But if I am a political motivated, I want that to be in papers and media because you want them to talk about it. Staged. So terrorists, when they attacked, 9/11 terrorists is a good example. When they attacked the Twin Towers, they're attacking the economic symbol of the United States. When they're attacking Pentagon, they did attack the Pentagon. The flight went into the front. Military symbol of the United States. The Twin Towers, economic symbol of the United States. World Trade Center was there. And then they attacked, another flight was going, we don't know because it was brought down by the people in it. Another flight was on its way to DC, either to Washington, to the White House, or to Capitol Hill. But that is a political, economic, military of the United States. Where are the targets? It is staged, big time staged. A is aim. Do they have a political aim? Do they have a larger economic aim, not for personal gain? Oh, I like the laptop for me. No, larger for my community, for my ethnic group. You know the ethnic group definitions now. So some groups, ethnic groups, use terrorism as a means to achieve an end for separation of their state, separatist movements. Remember, like I mentioned about LTTE, 4 letters, Liberation Tigers Tamil Elam. Write it down. This is a terrorist movement, coined as terrorist movement by the American state and Canada and many other foreign countries. But they were fighting, they were Tamils, same ethnic group as me, fighting against, I've never been to Sri Lanka, against the Sri Lankan government. Why? They want separate government. So they started using violent methods. Political goal is separate state because they're not treated equal. Remember equality and freedom? They were not treated equal by their government, so they wanted more equality. They think that in the current condition, they could get equality from the majority of the people singly, so they want a separate state. So Tamil Elam, they fought for almost 25 years civil war in that they used suicide bombers. And they even used terrorism is a tactic. It's not a strategy. Used even going back to ancient Rome. The ancient Romans occupied the Jewish state areas. Jewish members used that as a tactic, terrorism. But suicide bombers, like using a suicide vest, that was first used by the LTTE. By the way, terrorism has been an increase around the world. We are studying comparative politics, right? From 1970s to 2015 peak. It's a small decline from 2015, that's it, but it's in constant increase. The number of deaths and things, it's used as a tactic. Are you following? Aim has to be there, visa, all the 4. Now, I want to ask another thing. State-sponsored terrorism comes here. Yeah, it's sitting on both sides, sponsored terrorism. State-sponsored terrorism. What does that mean? State is sponsoring. It's not yes, it's an act of non-civilians, non-state actors against civilians. But state-sponsored, like Pakistan, recruits civilians in Pakistan, trains them, and sends them into Kashmir to kill civilians so that they could get the Kashmir state for themselves. They cannot engage Indian military directly because Pakistan military is much smaller economically and number-wise. India is a much bigger state population, economic-wise, huge difference. So Pakistan, terrorism is usually a tactic against the weak, against the strong, weak against the strong. Is a tactic used by the weak against the strong. Keep that in mind. It's amazing when I was reading about the Inca Empire. I'm going to 1526, when Atavalpa was the king. He was the Inca Empire king. The conquistadors, Francisco Pizarro, came with his men and occupied. Just few men, Spaniards, came in the metal-covered horses, harquebus, which is like a gun. They shot and captured the emperor and took over the entire Inca state of hundreds of thousands of people in the battlefield. By 32 people in a battle of Cajamarca, captured the emperor. Okay? And they were ruling them for a while. And another Pachacuti, the last emperor of Incas, started using terrorism. They have never seen white people before. They never seen anything. They started using attack and use terror, I don't want to go into the gruesome details of how they killed the Spaniards, which they caught. But if you want, you could read a good book called Last Days of Incas. So I was thinking, wow, look at here, a group of people who had never been in contact with other civilized society here, when they were defeated and they become marginalized and weak, they're using terrorism as a tactic against the strong, which is the Spaniards. They're the target. So state-sponsored terrorism is sponsored by the state. So Iran sponsors terrorism. Yes. Hezbollah, Army of God, is a terrorist organization sponsored by Iran. They're in Lebanon. Their goal is to defeat Israel. It's regional, but it is present in South Lebanon. They are the strong occupancy. Are you following? Hezbollah, Hezbollah, Army of God. Google, when I say these names, Google, learn a little bit more so you understand and it goes into your mind. Okay. State-sponsored terrorism. Now, state against civilians. State against civilians. What would you call that? State against civilians. That's true. If a state does it to its own civilians, it's human rights violation. Rights violations. Okay? Human rights violations. I didn't write the word fully. Violation. Okay, if you want. Domestic, you could put here in bracket. This is domestic. What if a neighboring state does it to civilians in your state? That will be war crimes. Human rights violations, a good example is genocide. Genocide. Yeah. What is genocide? You heard of the word, right? Oh, genocide here, Darfur, save Darfur. You see t-shirts. Genocide has been done over centuries, but the word didn't happen until World War II. The biggest genocide in 20th century, the first biggest genocide, is Armenian genocide. Armenians were killed in Turkey. Okay? And even now, modern day Turkey does not agree to what happened. More than 1 million people were killed. I'm not going to go into the details because you could teach a whole class on the 20th century genocide. Of course, no kidding. If you're interested in reading a wonderful Pulitzer Prize winning book by Samantha Power, Problem from Hell. Problem from Hell. Why America didn't do any jack squat in many of these international genocides. There is a reason, political reasons. Check it out. Genocide, the word was coined during Nazi Holocaust when they were killing 6 million Jews by a Jewish scholar, a linguist, and a lawyer who was in New York, escaped from Poland. And he was listening to Churchill go on and on in the radio about the political atrocity of the Nazis doing to the Jews. And he thought we need a term to define it. And so he went on to using his linguistic abilities, put right? Genetics, hello? Yeah, he used Latin and Greek. Side, homicide is killing human. Side is killing. Genocide, genetical killing based on ethnic race. So the definition, proper definition is a systematic killing. That means through policy, systematic killing through policy that is coming from the top of the state as a policy, not from just random one guy going around and killing. As a policy, the Nazis said that as a policy to kill Jewish people, coming to kill, okay? Systematic elimination of people as a policy based on their race, ethnicity, religion, or nationality. Write it down. So human rights, one good example is genocide. Okay? And did I define war to you? Before I define war crimes, war, write it down. War is, I'm going to give Clausewitz's definition. Simple, powerful. War is a continuation of politics by other means. Quote unquote. War is a continuation of politics by other means. He's saying to achieve political goal, war is a means. That's why it's political violence. The goal is political goal. And war is used as a means to achieve it. If you tell another country to do something and they don't do it, then you use war as a means. So when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait and occupied Kuwait, when the United States said, we are giving you, Bush said, we're giving you days, couple of days, I think 48 hours, you get out by that time out of Kuwait. If you're not, there will be war. He didn't get out. He thought that is just bluffing. And then we went in and kicked him out of Kuwait. Are you following? That's war. War. So the political goal was to get Saddam out of Kuwait. And for that, the means was send American Marines and soldiers, army. Are you following? That's war's definition. Now next, write it down. War crimes. When I say war crimes, a good example would be, yeah, the Nazis is a war crimes, but the Americans also were accused of war crimes in Vietnam. There's a famous incident called My Lai Massacre, MYLAI massacre. When the Vietnam War was happening, when soldiers were going, it's a big guerrilla warfare, the whole thing. So Viet Cong will be hidden and attacking American soldiers. Remember, weak against the strong, just like terrorism, the guerrilla warfare. Weak against the strong is the United States. So they won't fight against the Americans. When we went in, we were trying to weed out the guerrilla warriors. So some of our soldiers went and killed the women, children, buffalo, everything moving. There's a book called Shoot Anything That Moves. It's like a policy from top down, and killed, and it's unbelievable massacre because they're killing unarmed people. They are not fair game. They're not soldiers carrying weapons. Are you following? If you take ethics of the use of force, you will understand more in detail. But for now, you just understand that. So, war crimes. If you want to give example, My Lai Massacre, MYLAI, Google, are the Nazi war crimes, which we had a Nuremberg trial. It's an international tribunal set up by Russia, United States, France, England, all of them, in Germany. We also had Tokyo trials, an international tribunal. Anyway, are you with me? Let's talk about terrorism and regimes. What regimes? You know different types of regimes, right? You know an authoritarian regime, democratic regime, and you also know illiberal, right? You learned it last class. Illiberal, IL, which is the word coined by Fareed Zakaria. Illiberal regimes. So let's see where terrorism, especially domestic terrorism, could happen. Hi. In authoritarian, it's very less, lower risk of terrorism happening. You know why? The authoritarian will squelch it using force. And what's the problem? The problem is he doesn't give a darn about civil liberties, violating people's civil liberties. So, like Putin, when he came to power, authoritarian, right? When as a prime minister, he wasn't even a president, and this was, well, I'll use that example for illiberal democracies. Maybe I'll give a good example. In Saudi Arabia, there was a group of people, fundamentalists, who went in and took over the mosque. Yes, the main Muslim holy site. They took over in the Kaaba region in Mecca, and this Islam the entire world was shocked. And so Saudi Arabia, they were took over and said, like, we will not come out. The Saudi government has to give up their power. One of their requests were, and the Saudi government consulted with the clerics to bring external people into their domestic affairs. So they brought French commandos with condensed tear gas, about 500 pounds of canisters, rolled into the underground where these terrorists were hiding, smoked them out and killed them, all death penalty and others. So it's Siege of Mecca, if you want to read a good book on it. Okay, authoritarian state will not, very less chances of it happening. They wouldn't worry about civil liberties. Next one is democratic states, moderate level, not low level, moderate level threat. Because of civil liberties, we cannot do, like for United States, what other countries rulers can do. We have a code of law. You have to present in that, and with evidence, case goes on, everything. Even these guys who went into the US Capitol, hundreds of them, just a couple of hundred was arrested, that's it. I'm still waiting for more to come. But the point is, even if it's arrested, in jail, one of the guys asking for organic food. Imagine in an authoritarian government, he's asking for organic food in prison. He will only eat organic food and not regular food, and he's going on a fasting. In authoritarian government, it will be totally different treatment, right? So in democracies, it's moderate level, the terrorism threat. In illiberal democracy, again, in democracies, it has the capacity to squelch it, but the constraint is civil liberties. Okay, individual liberties cannot be violated. In illiberal democracies, which is illiberal means it's a state which is in transition. It pretends to be a democracy, but it's not fully yet there. And Soviet Union, when it collapsed and was becoming a capitalistic society, from a communistic society to capitalistic, when Putin was the prime minister, okay, Boris Yeltsin was the president, okay, Putin, Putin, Boris Yeltsin, Boris, Yeltsin, Yeltstin. President has all the powers. Remember the semi-presidential system I explained? He has foreign powers, all this. But Putin, no, his days are numbered. So he want to secure power. He used military to go and do scorched earth policy in Chechnya, where there was a Muslim separatist group, and using terrorists as a means to achieve it. He did not spare anyone any civil liberty problems. And their people thought, okay, this is great, strong leader we need, and Putin is our man. Support opinion polls went up high for him after that operation. But scorched earth policy is like you destroy everything, home, other things. You don't worry about casualties. If there's terrorists hiding in a building, and if there are people also, civilians, others are there, you don't bomb the entire building, because you have to do the calculus of whether this terrorist lives, killing them, is it worth losing this many lives? Some would say not even worth losing one life. Over wait till you could capture them separately. Okay, there are different types of arguments, scaling, sliding scale arguments. If you take my ethics of the use of force class, we go here. We're not going to discuss all that. But the point is, Putin used scorched earth, completely destroyed everything, nothing left for this, for those he's targeting. So authoritarian states are illiberal democracies because of the weak state capacity. Also, terrorism is high chances. You following? Okay. Now, I want you to check out the documentary and answer for this lecture and the documentary. Good luck.